Welcome, friends. Tonight's presentation on Jewish, Lesbian, Queer Feminism, a Retrospective. I am Mark Bowman, Executive Director of the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network, the host of tonight's program. LGBTQ-RAN is a unique venture dedicated to preserving the history of LGBTQ religious movements around the world. LGBTQ-RAN is a digital enterprise. We are not a physical repository that stores papers. We advise and support leaders and groups in their efforts to preserve their records in appropriate archives. Furthermore, we collect and provide a treasure of historical information on our website about LGBTQ plus persons and groups from a wide array of religious expressions around the world. And finally, we encourage research and scholarship on queer religious history. Tonight, you all are going to be treated to hear Marla Brettschneider converse with a panel of founders and central players in Jewish, queer, lesbian, feminist movements. Evelyn, Torton Beck, Irena Klepfisz, and Sabrina Sojourner. You're going to get to hear a lively exchange on the development of Jewish, queer, lesbian feminism, its history and challenges, with a look at issues faced over the years and how these are playing out today. Some introductions. Our moderator, Marla Brettschneider, PhD, is an activist and professor of political theory at the University of New Hampshire, with a joint appointment in women's and gender studies and political science and international affairs. Her work is on Jewish diversity politics and political theory. Marla has published books on Jewish, feminist, queer, lesbian, anti-racist, class-based, and decolonial subjects, such as Juicy, Jewish, Queer, Lesbian Feminism for the 21st Century, Jewish Feminism and Intersectionality, and The Family Flamboyant, Race Politics, Queer Families, Jewish Lives. Her latest work is Revolutionary Legacies, Jewish Feminist Political Thinking, with Jamaica Kincaid, Golda Meir, Hannah Arendt, Frida Kahlo, Gertrude Stein, and Emma Goldman. Tonight's panelists are, first, Evelyn Torton Beck, PhD, Professor Emerita, University of Maryland, who is a scholar activist holding PhDs in both comparative literature and clinical psychology. In 2021, Evie received an honorary doctorate in Vienna, Austria, for her lifelong work in the creation of interdisciplinary women's studies and her continuing fight against anti-Semitism, homophobia, and all the isms that divide us. She was the editor of the groundbreaking Nice Jewish Girls, a lesbian anthology. A short film entitled Evie Torton Beck, Never in My Wildest Dreams, was recently made about her in Vienna. Secondly, Irena Klepfisz, PhD, is a lesbian poet activist who identifies as a practicing secular Jew. She was a co-founder and co-editor of Conditions magazine, and also the co-editor of The Tribe of Dinah, a Jewish women's anthology. Her most recent work, Her Birth and Later Years, New and Collected Poems, 1971 to 2021, received the Audre Lorde Award for Lesbian Poetry from the Publishing Triangle and was a finalist for National Jewish Book Award in Poetry. She is currently trying to preserve her late partner Judith Waterman's artwork and make it better known. Sabrina Sojourner, a Shaliach, Zibor, and community chaplain, has been leading services, teaching, and cultivating curiosity within Judaism for nearly 20 years. She is a featured speaker, scholar in residence, and faculty at synagogues, conferences, retreats, and Shabbatons across the country. In 2028, she launched Training the Heart to Listen, a conversational approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're in a treat with this panel here tonight, folks. For those of you watching this webinar, we welcome your comments or questions in the chat box of the Q&A function. The presenters will respond to those during the Q&A time toward the end of tonight's program. If you would like to offer personal greetings or comments to the presenters, stay here after the webinar has concluded, and you will be invited into the Zoom room with them. Please direct any technical concerns to Isaiah Poole, who is the tech manager for this program. Now, I am pleased to welcome Marla, Evie, Irena, and Sabrina to begin this retrospective conversation.
Thank you. That is so fantastic. And actually, it's not only retrospective. We'll get to that. First, of course, thanks to Mark and Isaiah and everyone at LGBTQ-RAN for reaching out to me with the idea for this event. You've been so great to work with and have made it possible for us to get to this evening, and also with everyone who is joining this webinar. It's just wonderful. So we had a great prep meeting, and I wish we had been able to record all the conversation and stories folks had shared just in prep for this. That was in itself just outstanding. So over the years, we've all been through often contradictory versions of different rounds of, is this too Jewish? Am I too Jewish or not Jewish enough? Too feminist, not feminist enough? Too lesbian, not enough? Are we race people or not? Anti-racist, etc. So we overlap on how we've been challenged in these ways, and also our particulars they really span. Evie had brought up thinking about, we talked a little bit about how we felt, the combination of our passions and our fears. And so tonight, if at all possible, in the span of one webinar, we're going to try and get to some of the then, the now, and the going forward, because these are tough times. And as many people know, we have, for example, Evie and Irena both being Holocaust survivors. And yet we each deal in our own and overlapping ways with legacies of the Holocaust and mass tragedies. And again, Evie and Irena sharing some early aspects from the early 1980s, how activism and publishing created communities, academic fields, movements, activist movements, and made people's lives possible. And maybe they'll get to talk a little bit about the Vilde Chayes. But we had also talked about how they could see some changes over time in just looking at the different editions of their founding books. They've both published plenty. And Sabrina comes into this in so many of her own ways. So much that's new related to this early period for Irena and Evie, and how community building, growing movements, leadership, literary work, and publishing have been key in some similar and importantly different ways. So we've all got politics, women's studies, sexuality, redefining gender, language, arts, creativity, and expression. If you don't know what some of these folks have been up to even recently, it will continue to blow your mind, as they always have. And they're all part of it in this Jewish lesbian feminist traditions with Yiddish and what came to be Ashkenazi hegemony, even though many of us can still love Yiddish, and poetry and midrash, spirituality, and with all our kinds of Jewishness, spiritual, secular, cultural, political, and the ways that we make life possible and make meaning. So we're going to take some opening comments from each of our panelists. This is the layout for our portion. Then we hope to have be more conversational, and before we get to the Q&A. So I'm going to begin by inviting Evie to make some opening comments.
Well, hi. I am delighted to be here and to be both looking back and forward. It all started, Nice Jewish Girls, I think Isaiah was showing the covers, but started with a scrap of paper at a National Women's Studies Association. There had been some articles in scattered journals that were very popular at the time, not all of them lesbian, in Shmata and Chutzpah and Conditions and Gay Community News, that people were talking some about being lesbian and being Jewish and being invisible and experiencing anti-Semitism in lesbian feminist communities and experiencing homophobia in Jewish communities. But it was really still a very taboo topic. And I decided at that time, I think as a Holocaust survivor, I could not feel safe. By that time, I was out. I was very active as a lesbian feminist. It felt every time I came out anywhere, it felt like jumping off a diving board and not knowing where you were going to land. So I decided to have some workshops at the National Women's Studies Association, because the only way I knew to be safe was to be visible. That was my response to experiencing these things, that silence meant a kind of a death. So Gloria Greenfield, who at that time was still a lesbian feminist, had Persephone Press, that was a lesbian feminist press, and she wrote me, she was at this workshop, and she wrote me on a scrap of paper, would you like to put together a collection based on this topic? And not knowing what I was getting into, I said, sure, I would love to do that. And that is how the anthology came into being. And it seemed like it was going to be a very easy task. We would just talk to lesbian feminists and explain to them what anti-Semitism was, when we were invisible, when they were saying things that were offensive, because it wasn't just the stereotypes that were being carried over, it was also the invisibility, the complete lack of consideration, like putting a concert on Yom Kippur evening, because nobody seemed to know that even atheist Jews would not probably go to a concert on Yom Kippur evening. So we thought we would do that, and that is how the anthology came into being. One of the main things that it felt very important to get across is people seem to have the idea Jewish equals religion, and that was it. And the notion of Jewish culture, Jewish peoplehood, Jewish differences, Jewish values, Jewish ways of looking at the world, Yiddishkeit as a part of being Jewish as a whole way of looking at the world was something that most non-Jews were quite ignorant about, and maybe even some Jews hadn't even thought about it, because although we have been doing a lot of work about identity issues, many of us had not even taken our Jewishness seriously as an identity. So this was really a building of consciousness about what it meant to be a Jew, what it meant to be a lesbian feminist, what it meant to work in community with others. And one of the things that we discovered that was really surprising is, all, as Marla had started to say, although we were all Jewish and lesbian, we were very, very different. The notion that we were all one community was definitely not part of the picture. But there was this anthology did create a sense of organizing, a sense of community, and we began to deal with these differences among us. And from looking at the perspective of right now, we Nice Jewish Girls went into 3 different editions because Persephone Press folded, and then another feminist press, Crossing Press, took it up, and then finally Beacon Press took it up. So there are differences in these 3 anthologies. Well, the first 2 are pretty much the same because it was such a quick changeover. But 7 years went by before from 82 to 89, and the main difference, I only took out 2 pieces. One was Gloria Greenfield's piece because it felt a little bit on the just almost hysterical side, and I think I had a sense she became a very reactionary, I call her reactionary Jew, but I think I had a sense that energy wasn't quite right for the next edition. And one other piece, and other than that, the pieces that were really added most of all were more themes on mothers and daughters, generations of passing the Holocaust through, how that worked in us, more about difference, and especially about Israel. I think that was the most problematic aspect of the 3 editions of Nice Jewish Girls. Each one came out after something terrible had happened in Israel. And each time the anthology did not reflect that. So it seemed as if we were really not caring about Israel's invasion of Lebanon, that we didn't care about Sabra and Shatila. So I think that the last edition really tried to fix that and show our activism in terms of recognizing that Israel was, in fact, colonizing the West Bank. At that time, it wasn't quite as extreme as it is now, and anti-Semitism wasn't hijacked by the far right, so that we were in a different space. And I think I will let that go now. I don't know whether I'll have a chance to show the pictures, maybe show the 2 pictures from Nice Jewish Girls for Joan Byron's essay. That's funny. You don't look like a Jewish lesbian. She had all kinds of pictures.
If you could re-show that visual.
We were very visible in as many as Jewish and as lesbians. And there was one other one, if you can get it, Isaiah, the one, a kike dyke against the KKK. I don't know if you can show. I just wanted to say we are still demonstrating there was recently just last week, the Trua had a big Jews Against ICE, and there were many, many lesbians there, including me. So we're still fighting for that.
Yeah, we'll hopefully see. Yeah. So, right, the 1980s activist photographs are different and unfortunately so relevant to last week and today. Let's hear Irena a little bit, would you?
Well, I guess I'll start just by saying how I came out, which was that I'm not one of these people that knew that she was a dyke when she was 2 years old. I didn't. I really didn't know I was a dyke. I didn't even know I was a dyke when I came out. I mean, I fell in love with a woman, and it was a total surprise to me. I had not focused very much. I'd been in a lot of therapy. I hadn't focused on my sexuality at all, and it was a shock. And I had lost my job, my only full-time teaching job that I had for 4 years in 1973. And I always had this fantasy of being a poet by the ocean. So I learned how to drive. I got a car. I was on unemployment, and I drove out to Montauk at the tip of Long Island to become a poet by the ocean. It was very lonely, but I was trying to think through also my sexuality. And I was very, very lucky because through various circumstances, I bumped into somebody. I was introduced to Blanche Cook. Now, she wasn't the Blanche Cook that people recognize now. She was still unknown, but she was Blanche Cook. And she was someone who had gone to high school with Audre Lorde. So she knew Audre Lorde, and she knew Joan Larkin, and she heard I was a poet. She said, oh, well, I can connect you with these people when you get back to the city. So I sort of fell into writers immediately. I mean, I was very, very lucky in that way. I was lucky to come out in New York. And I found community immediately, and that was really just wonderful. What was not so wonderful was coming out to the rest of the world. And I was in the Jewish world. I had my PhD in Victorian literature. That was not working out. I was an economic cut at LIU. So I was trying to become somehow within the Jewish Yiddish world. I come from a Yiddish-speaking background, even though I myself did not speak Yiddish at home. I spoke Polish. But I went to Yiddish schools and I was literate, and I was trying to basically move into a new area. But the Jewish community, both secular and whatever, was really, really homophobic, and I found it virtually impossible. And I started, as I connected more with people in the lesbian community, I started withdrawing from the Jewish community. Now, that didn't mean that I thought of my lesbianism in any different my Jewishness in any different way. I was still very much committed, and I sort of became a kind of independent researcher. I was very interested in finding out about Yiddish women writers and intellectuals and political figures. And I sort of started doing research on my own. And it was very interesting because, I mean, on the one hand, I felt the homophobia in the Jewish community, but there was also this strange kind of attitude. For example, the very first essay that I ever wrote was about being childless, about not having children. And the critique, and as a child survivor, as someone who came out of Holocaust, demographics and having children, of course, was always the thing. You had to make up for what Hitler did. And I wrote from that point of view, obviously. This is what I was raised with. And I was basically told that that the essay wasn't lesbian enough, which was kind of interesting. I don't know whether the implication was that I was too Jewish. That might have been one of the critiques of it, but it wasn't. So the idea that I wasn't lesbian enough within the lesbian community was kind of interesting. It was very traumatic for me to withdraw from the Jewish community. And I think it's really interesting to me now that we're so integrated, or I feel so integrated into the Jewish community within that secular community that I grew up in. And yet the danger is still, there's a different danger now than the danger I experienced then. I mean, I don't know, those of us that are that old, like Evie and me, remember that it was very dangerous in a very different way. There was this enormous hostility to gays. That hostility has subsided, obviously, and there was an enormous amount of acceptance. We had gay marriage, all of that, the removal of homosexuality as a mental disorder. But we now have different danger. Now we're sort of integrated. I feel that a lot of the energy that was expended on hating gays is now directed at trans people. It's been kind of moved over to that particular group. Though I don't think gays are are totally being accepted politically anyway. But we are much more integrated into society than we were at that time. And it seems to me that despite that integration, we're still in an enormous amount of danger. So it was a very wonderful period of my life. At the same time, that was also very painful. And it changed, and eventually it changed. And I felt more at peace with my community, and I felt much more accepted. And I was able to operate, I think, and to move. And that in fact, whatever splits have occurred since then, especially recently, have not been about gayness, but have been about Israel, which remained a subject that was extremely, extremely difficult to talk about then, and even more difficult, I think, right now.
I think Mark asked me because of the publication of Juicy, and which is just perfect because I dedicated it to some of these earlier folks like Irena and Evie and Isaiah. I don't know if you can show Juicy and the dedication page, and then there's Sabrina with a new piece in that. And I get to work when I can, never enough, with Evie and Irena, and they're still completely active in my intellectual and activist life. So Sabrina, let's just hear from you a little bit because we do want some time for conversation, and we'll see about the images. Go ahead.
First of all, I want to say that I saw several names of people that I know from when I lived in Washington, D.C. and visited other places. So I'm really thrilled that you are here for this conversation. And the piece that I have in Juicy is a midrash, a modern midrash on our venture out of Egypt. And it's told not from the wide view of God, but from the view of a family. And it sticks fairly close to the literature, but there is absolutely some sweet moments in it that to talk about a family and not have those kind of moments would not make a whole lot of sense. But and I'm really happy to be here with all of you. It's been a wild ride over the last many, many, many years, decades. And one of the things that that has become very important to me is my voice and my words, and working in the community as a shliach zivor, as a teacher and as a writer, are part of what have helped to form me, especially in this third or fourth stage of my life. One of the pictures that Isaiah has is of the 2019 Women's March. And it is a picture, I'm on the bima with Rabbi Mira, as well as with her daughter, who's also soon to be a rabbi, and as well as with Yavila McCoy. And it was while it was not the first time that there was a service on the Shabbat, it was the first time that it was completely led by women of color. And it was that was very important to us because it was the beginning of the Trump administration. And so it was also wonderful to have Rabbi Mira, who she and I have been friends for a good 20 years, and is is a friend as well as a teacher. I think it's important for us I think one of the things that is my different in terms of my relationship to Judaism is that it came out of my own curiosity, because I was one of those kids who asked too many questions in church. And I never found a church I finally got old enough that my conversations with clergy did not get my family kicked out of a church, but it still got me in a lot of trouble. And I decided I didn't care because it was part of my learning. And it turns out that I was among one of the first to get my DNA done. And it turns out that my drive towards Judaism and my criticism of Christianity was innate, because it was part of my skeletal structure, part of my DNA, as I learned more around that same time about my great grandmothers on both my sides of my families, it's something that was also part of who I am. And I find it really important to be visible in all the communities that I relate to, whether it's inside a Jewish institution or outside a Jewish institution, whether it's inside a Black or brown community or within being one of a small number in a white community. It is the things that I put forward is the sense of inclusion and that everybody belongs. And I've created a number of different strategies to handle those people who decide that they want to question my authenticity, including ways to just avoid the question altogether and get away from it. But I think it's important for us to understand that the ways in which we decide to battle can be ways that further injure us, or they can be ways in which we make light of somebody else's faux pas. Because it's not my story, is my story. It doesn't belong to anybody except me. And the people that I dearly love, who are also part of the Jewish community, finally have a voice that will be focused on them and some of the serious allies who are already on this a part of this program, because Judaism is a faith and a practice and a religion and many more, and a philosophy. It is all those things. There's lots of storytelling that happens from all sides, and it's all important. There's no one way to be Jewish. And one of the things that I've learned over the last 20 plus years is that some of the most fervent and educated Jews are actually atheists. And I find that fascinating. And they're also very fervent in their prayers, because I've witnessed that as well. So I think that it's one of those things that there's no one way to be Jewish. There's no one way to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And the most important thing is that we share our stories, and we don't take and that we take lightly the people who want to try and pigeonhole us, including, like I said before, I only share my story with people who I love, who I know love me. I don't bother with people who are just curious. And I'm going to end what I have to say. I'm going to end right now, because there's much more
Thank you.
that we want to talk about.
You all spoke to so many of the issues. I don't even have to follow up with questions. Irena, can't wait. Go ahead.
Can I just add something? Because I mean, that about identifying as Jewish, one of the things, it makes people smile when I say I'm a practicing secular Jew. But the fact is that I was raised by secular Jews who were very strongly identified as Jews. And I had very little knowledge of the religion. I mean, when I came to this country, I thought that Jews that went to synagogue were just simply weird, because I thought that Jews had to be socialists. You definitely didn't believe in God. You had to be a socialist. And this was totally a Yiddish kind of environment, the Jewish Labor Bund. And one of the things that I was very interested in was how in the movement that there were Jewish women would say, I am nothing, because they did not attend synagogue or have observance. They would say, I am nothing. And Melanie and I talked a lot about this. We were both nice Jewish girls. We got to know each other. And that was one of the impetuses behind the tribe of Dinah, which was Blue Greenberg had come out with a book on Jewish feminism, and Susanna Heschel had come out on being a Jewish feminist, and they were totally from the observant position. And we wanted to do an anthology that was secular, very much focused on secular. And I was amazed afterwards, especially lesbian activists who came from lefty backgrounds, were the first ones to say, I am nothing. And we would tell them, no, you're actually quite something. You're a secular Jew. I mean, that you don't have to give up. You don't give up your Jewishness just because you don't go to a synagogue or practice. So that was sort of the contribution that I feel that I made, or that we made, Melanie and I, with that particular book, was to sort of inject that particular identity, which wasn't even recognized. I mean, nobody really talked about. Where I came from, Weltlichkeit, that was worldliness, that secularism was sort of the norm. And it took me a long time to realize that that was not the norm at all, and that there was a much wider world out there. And that was just the opposite. I had to really learn to respect those women who were observant, because I had been brought up very much sort of dismissive of that part of Judaism. So it was a very interesting mix for me in terms of how we moved with that issue.
I do want to remind everybody that, most people know that racism, some of you know that anti-Semitism is skyrocketing, obviously anti-immigrant and foreigner, et cetera, English as a first language movement. But you may not also know that, given also what Irene just shared, that we're facing a new period of retrenchment, not only in laws and formal ways for LGBTQ things, but also that public opinion, which had reached its so-called, height of acceptance in the United States, has actually begun to plummet. And it's plummeting most quickly amongst young people who had long been the drivers of the numbers going up. And so we now come out of these decades of lively Jewish, feminist, queer movements, anti-racist movements, we come like decades now where we've been in communities and we've been creative and done great political work. So does anyone have any thoughts about going into being in and moving forward in this extreme period of hatred, but we're not starting exactly from the same place as we were in the 1970s or the 1940s?
I'll start with that. I think one of the advantages I have is that from the time I was a small child, I got bullied for being Black. I was targeted because I was Black. I even had Black kids who wanted to fight me because I wasn't there. From their perspective, I wasn't Black enough. The point being is that long before I knew that long ago, I knew that if I really had to have my own skills and my own techniques for being able to get out of situations that could have killed me, or at minimum seriously injured me. And sometimes there were other people around who helped that to happen, and other times I was on my own and had to figure it out on my own. And I share that because that's one of the reasons I take it seriously enough not to get injured, but I don't take a lot of the stuff that comes out seriously, because part of what they want is for me and anybody else that they're targeting to be afraid. Because if we're afraid, we will do our own self-deporting, we will do our own hiding, we will do all those things that we don't need to do. We need to be visible. We need to be loud. We need to continue to do the things that give us life so that we can give life to others and also provide them with the information and the skills and the knowledge that they need to know in terms of being able to protect themselves and stay alive.
Yeah, go ahead, Evie.
Yeah, hi, that was wonderful, Sabrina and Irena both. I'd like to actually, before I answer your question, Isaiah, could you put back number 11 and number 18? I wanted to explain something, because history is history, but I wanted to explain the labyrinth in the Jewish star. I don't know how many of you noticed it on the cover, but it was a big, big deal. And I think that's number 11, Isaiah. The labyrinth was the symbol of the Amazons, or at least mythologically, not proven, but it is a double axe. And so we actually asked a rabbi, or I asked a rabbi, whether that was a desecration of the Jewish star, because this was such the response to when I told people I was working on Nice Jewish Girls was, are there many? I mean, we were it's hard to get across that sense of how invisible we were. So the fears we have now are not so much about our invisibility, but what it is that is going on in the world around us. But to do something like this felt like a huge transgression. And I was told that the Star of David is actually not a religious symbol at all. So that was a big relief that we hadn't desecrated anything. And then can you show number 18? Because that's one of my very favorite, and really it feels like one of the photographs that Jeb took that is in Nice Jewish Girls, that really reminds us of what it is that we still have to do now. Kike Dyke against the KKK, no more lynchings, holocausts, or witch hunts. And it feels like so much of what is in Nice Jewish Girls, I feel like it did go out of print because it really was before its time. There was no lesbian studies at the time it came out. I mean, and Jewish studies didn't even take feminist books in it. I mean, so that it did not have a college audience. It had a very wide everyday people audience. And of all the things I've ever written, this is the one that I feel has done the most in the world and means the most to me. But nowadays, it's very frightening to me. I mean, I was a child. I was older than Irena when I lived under the Nazis in Vienna for an entire year when my father was in the concentration camp. The Nazis marched by my house every day. I was thrown out of school. So I remember all the things that were going on. I was between 5 and 6. So that it's what's happening now. I have to work very hard not to think it's happening again, and to make those differences, and to know that in fact we do have agency, and it's important to be out there and to make our voices heard and to make our visibility as Jews heard. I think Irena had mentioned this, and I would agree. Was much harder for me to come out as a Jew in many places than as a lesbian. That's the place that was the most vulnerable. And I think today, among Jews, I find it hard. I have some very close friends who are extremely progressive and activist, and who have what I consider very right-wing views about Israel, Palestine, and that's really, really hard. So it's a whole different situation now. We don't only have them, we have internecine conflict, and I find that very difficult, except there are so many people speaking out that really, I feel supported by this work.
We all share history in the National Women's Studies Association, which was crucial. And you've got some founders here that made that possible. And at the same time, Jews, have been so marginalized, and there's so much trouble Jewishly with that organization too. I mean, it didn't start out pro-lesbian, and then, now it's got a very different take. But so we share a lot of overlapping spheres in multiple communities. And also with many of the people on the talk. So something else on your mind? I can ask questions endlessly, but you probably want to speak to something that someone else said, and then we'll take closing comments and move to Q&A.
Well, the one thing I did want to add was that the even first edition of Nice Jewish Girls, we had Jews from Iraq, from South America, who spoke Arabic, who had been stateless because of the parents had been thrown out, born in India. So we have that, and we have African American and biracial, and it was a small amount, but it was at least a starting point of consciousness that we're not all Ashkenazi Jews in this country even, and that it was a seed that I think has grown, and now there is so much of writing and speaking out of Jews of many different cultures.
Definitely, and never enough, and not all white Northern European heritage. And what Juicy actually finally makes it to, it's by a slim margin, majority, Mizrahi, Sephardi, non-white, people of color in this edition, and of the latest Jewish queer feminist thing. Every so often we get, we can never measure up to these fantastic Evie and Irena and Melanie works. But and what's upsetting is a lot of people will still tell me it can't be done, right? They can't find non-white or non-Ashkenazi folks, and then also because everything needs to change. And people don't remember that Tribe of Dinah and Nice Jewish Girls, as much as we need a lot more of it, they were not followed by decades of doing more, of really exploring our diversity and building community across our differences. It was it all went backwards, and there was a retrenchment into white Ashkenazi presumptions, religion, etc. And so if people don't know this, all the criticism that we rightly yell at each other lovingly and sometimes not so lovingly is interesting, because Irena, Melanie, Evie, and lots of other people set the stage for a different development of our movements and our communities. And it didn't always stay there for the past few decades. don't know if anyone wants to speak to that.
Well, it's sort
Like
of
my work shouldn't be seen as so new and original. It should be, oh, nice, Marla, getting us back to our roots, right? But okay, Irena.
this is sort of a little bit off of what you're saying, but I think one of the things that's really striking to me and that's very, very painful to watch is in fact progressives, and by that I mean and lesbian and queer progressives are split. That what is clearly progressive and what is clearly not progressive or right wing is being very blurred. And there is this enormous, I mean, when you have fights about a Dyke March over whether Zionists can be in the march, that splits the community. I don't have a specific answer, but I think it's really a problem that I don't know how, that we should be really directly addressing about the influence of the whole issue of Israel and how it's affecting everything. I mean, it's everywhere. And Israelis, the whole issue of how Israelis are being treated or seen, as individuals. And it's fracturing. I mean, there are people that have stopped talking to me. And there's some people maybe I've stopped talking to. I mean, it's really that united front. I don't feel like we have a really united front anymore because of this fracturing. There used to be a time where you could say all lesbians, where you could have a Dyke March without kind of splintering off or cancellations or whatever, and people resigning from committees. I think it's a real problem. I don't have an answer to give this evening, but I think the problem has to be sort of faced and identified and we have to start dealing with it and figuring out, because it makes us weak and it makes us vulnerable.
A lot of the questions that are coming in the Q&A reflect the themes that you are continuing to talk about. I'm like Irena about Hitler and Jews as a race and the weaponization of anti-Semitism and putting it in the context of anti-racist, anti-colonial work, etc. And Irena has a new piece in a fabulous this collection on Jewish reflections on October 7th, which, at least in a book form, goes from everyone has to be respectful, but that I did last year also, from the pretty far right to the pretty far left Jewishly. And then there's another one that's not specifically Jewish. It's got Muslims, Christians, and whoever else. And that book, it's got all sorts of diversity, including geographic diversity that my Irena Klepfisz's and Claire Kinbergs have never been in conversation with folks from the Jewish community in Pakistan that no one knows about, no one in the first, industrialized world seems to know about, et cetera. But I don't know how we pulled that book off. It's astonishing, but I don't know how we would do in person, and we're not doing a great job as a community and in our organizations. We pulled it off as a book in writing, but I don't know if anyone else wants to, before we have to wrap up soon, speak anymore to what you've learned from history, what you might want to say to any version of your younger self, or what you want to say to some people now. You've got the floor. What would you like to say to whoever now, or to your younger self?
Two things. One is very present in that this past Sunday, Gershom.Cosbar.org is online with pieces by mostly women of color, and it is an invitation for anyone who wants to provide information about anybody who would like to submit an issue. And it is not just by me, it's also by my dear friend and sister from another mother, Tamara Fish. And we've been working on this for over 2 years, although it's been a dream of ours for the last 5 years. And we are are really pleased with who we have, and we're open to anyone who wants to submit a piece. And there's information on the website on how to do that. So that's one thing. The other piece of this is that sometimes I feel like we put more emphasis on our fears than on our love and our friendships, our colleagueships, including the ones that drive me a little crazy, but I keep going back to them because they also have good ideas and ask me questions that I haven't thought to ask myself. And so I think leaning too much into fear, especially for those of us who have lived a life of fear, is not helpful. It's like one of those things that I give it a few minutes of cuddling in the morning and then I leave it in bed, but because it doesn't help me throughout the day to go to that place of being afraid. And in terms of my favorite quote about history is James Baldwin's, "Our history is each other. That is our only guide. One cannot denigrate another's history without denigrating their own."
Thank you, Sabrina. We have a few more minutes if we want, if Evie and Irena want to say a little bit more.
Well, I don't know. I agree with you, Sabrina, about the fear, but this question of, I'm very angry actually, because I was raised as a child Holocaust survivor, Zionism and the imagination that Israel was going to be a utopia that would not only save Jews, but would be a whole new world. That's what I really believed when I was my younger self, very much younger. And I guess that stayed with me until I couldn't see that anymore. But I'm angry at sort of the lies I was told and that I believed, maybe a little bit like if I were Christian and would believe in Santa Claus and it was taken away. I mean, it sounds trivial, but it really is very deep. And I don't know, I wish I had a way of thinking that we could heal this split. And it feels very ironic that the thing that was going to save Jews now feels like is splitting us open. But maybe we're just in the middle of something that, and something will emerge. I mean, I read somewhere that hope is the Jewish way of staying alive, and maybe and that is what I hang on to, a hope that the younger generation will do it differently, will maybe not be so caught up in myths that they were told, and would be able to see things a little more clearly, and would be more open, that Sabrina says, not judging each other as much.
Again, I'm getting repeats of some great questions from the chat. One question from someone thinking about people who aren't Jewish, about spiritual practice and how to live the best versions of ourselves. I mean, I think I first had it articulated for me about 30 or whatever years ago when I was at a panel of Irena was speaking on, where she's like, to be secular doesn't mean I'm not spiritual. I mean, she's an artist. It was so helpful. And Sabrina, you can't put any of these people on this panel into any particular thing. And I don't know, I'd like you to speak for yourselves, but I mean, the spiritual practices that I think have worked for us wherever we are on religious and secular cultural spectrums are already being noted many times by this great panel: hope and love and connection and commitment to the Jewish people in all of the ways we upset each other. So there's a lot that if people want to concretize that a little bit more, you can certainly do that, but that's something that's been repeated in the chat. And I've heard the answers in there, but maybe they're not as clear to other people. Irena?
I don't know really what to say. I mean, it's interesting to me If Isaiah, if you could put that picture up of the march from 1989, that where we were gay and lesbian Yiddishists, and we were gay pride in New York City marching. I just don't think that we could do that now, which I think is really interesting. I mean, that it felt freer then. We were more unified then than we are right now. Yeah, there it
Yeah,
is.
look at that.
Yeah, and I don't think we could do that now. I think there'd be some kind of something or other, some kind of, I don't know, split of some sort, or we'd be questioned, whatever.
Right.
I
Or we
think,
get red paint thrown at us.
or what?
We get red paint thrown at us.
Paint thrown
Yeah.
at us.
I mean, I do think that we are in a really, really bad moment. I hate to be, I'm not being negative. I'm being realistic that we have to really figure out some really difficult dynamics that are going on. And some of that is the weaponization of anti-Semitism, which is unrecognizable. I mean, it's like such mind fucks that I can't even express it. We have to figure out how to deal with that. And we have to figure out how to deal with our own splits, and because they weaken us and they weaken the struggle. And when we're fighting with each other, when we should be fighting something else. And I don't know how that works out. I'm not that brilliant. I just know it's a problem that we need to be focused on and not try to pretend that it's not there. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. It's a hard moment. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have a gig coming up in Canada, and very honestly, I've been to Canada, I don't know how many times. I am now worried about whether my passport says I'm a naturalized citizen. I'm kind of worried. Was this a problem? I mean, should I even be thinking about this? It would never have popped into my head before. You just show a passport, period. And for the first time in my life, I mean, I'm more kind of worried, kind of nagging about it. Masha Gessen said something that has stayed with me. I read it about a year ago, maybe even earlier. I think she said it right after Trump was elected. She said that why is everybody surprised? She said it was a failure of imagination on the part of Americans, that they refused to look at the worst possible. And then her position was, you have to fantasize the worst. It's important to remember what the worst can be, not to defeat yourself, but to be prepared for it in some way. And I keep going back to that, about the failure of imagination. I don't know if that's helpful. That's all I can provide.
I think it's key, and especially the reality of imagination, that they're not separate. We're living in a time of truth and lies, and if you've studied the Holocaust and authoritarian regimes, like, there's a real truth and lie problem. And so there's a lot of questions in the chat. I just want to remind people of some basic statistics and information that we should all know, that yes, in the United States, the majority of Jews are of Ashkenazi Northern European descent. That still means there's hundreds of thousands of Jews in the United States who are who would be termed in U.S. categories, Jews of color and non-Ashkenazis. That in the world, Jews who are like me, Ashkenazi and of Northern, in my case, Eastern European descent, are an absolute minority of Jews worldwide. And if you don't know that, we have a lot to learn about how racism has created our touchstones in education. You may also know that, I don't know, I got a million, I can't remember, I can't see them all at once, but there's just a lot of factual information in response to these beautiful questions on the chat that I think would help us all to remember. Someone saying Jews are all white and European anyway, and like, that's completely absurd. And even amongst those of us who are white and European, Eastern European Jews, Eastern Europe was not considered Europe. I mean, we were, not only the Jews of them and the Slavic other race, but at the time, Eastern European Jews, I don't know where Evie's from, but they weren't even considered European. And so I'm gonna let Evie talk. And then we're going to need to wrap up. I'm being reminded.
Okay. Well, I wanted to address one of the questions that came up in the chat that I think is really important. And it's interesting because when I used to talk about this issue of anti-Semitism, I always was worried in the early days that it would only focus on Israel because we were trying to talk about what was going on in the United States. And now it has in some ways hijacked the discussion. But I want to go to the question, someone wrote that young Jews and call themselves queer. And I think that at this moment in history, women are being attacked in multiple ways. Sexism has risen maybe as much as anti-Semitism, and even worse. And I think that we need to preserve the word woman. I mean, trans is fine. There are trans people, but there are still women, and there are still lesbians. And I think that will be erased if we don't keep those words going. I think that it's really important. Women's studies departments are already being called only gender department studies, and I think that if we want to keep a focus on the fact that misogyny is alive and well, in addition to these other isms that we've talked about. So I would tell those young people, just do a little study of history before the word woman is wiped out once again, the way he used to replace she. That's my...
That is excellent. We're going to be moving back to the organizers of this fantastic event. I want you to look again at this beautiful screen, think of who Jews are. Some people also say, oh, Jews used to be immigrants. They're not anymore in the United States. Well, you're looking at two of them right there, and a good portion of current living American Jews of every race are also all immigrants. And we know also how much does that matter when ICE is sweeping up Native Americans. So Mark and Isaiah are back on. And so I would like to just really, from my heart, with all my love, thank you all. I think I have to turn it over to Mark.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Marla. And thank you, Evie, Irena, and Sabrina for inspiring us with your stories of courage and history, but also helping us honestly grapple and challenge us to respond to what's happening in our world today. I appreciate your honesty and openness about challenging us to do that. So thank you for this fascinating program. To all of you who are here and were active in the chat and sharing conversations and questions and comments. Within a few days, you will all receive an email with a link to a recording of tonight's program that you can share with friends and colleagues. If you're interested in more opportunities to explore the history of queer religious movements, check out the LGBTQ-RAN website, and particularly our events page. There you will find announcements of future online programs, as well as recordings of past presentations. Our next webinar on March 16th will be the presentation of the annual Virginia Ramey Mollenkott Award to Heather Rochelle White for her paper, Coming Out in the Parish Hall, New York's Gay Movement and the Church of the Holy Apostles. This special event will be both an in-person gathering in downtown Chicago, as well as live streamed. Sign up on the website to RSVP if you are in Chicago area and can attend, or to get the Zoom link to join this special presentation. In closing, I remind you that LGBTQ-RAN is the first and foremost source of information on LGBTQ plus religious history. We are a very small operation that is funded through the generosity of friends like you. So if you would like to see more programs like this one, and if you share our commitment to ensure that future generations will hear our voices and stories, please help make this happen with your gift. You can either go to giveq.org, that's giveq.org on your phone, tablet, or laptop, or click on the donate button on the LGBTQ-RAN homepage. With your credit card in hand, it only takes a couple of minutes to make a gift, and your gift does make a difference. On behalf of this whole audience, I offer again much gratitude to Marla, Evie, Irena, and Sabrina for their enlightening discussion. Good night to all.